Do you know when a film makes you feel so many emotions and you're just so pleased with how the film came out that you can do nothing but cry? That's where I've been for the last 5 minutes, having just watched Scream 6. And in a moment, there will be some spoilers. I have some very specific thoughts that I want to share, but no spoilers for just now. But this came off of the back of me not really loving Scream 5. And I was worried that, Scream 6 would be very similar, and I have to say, it was perfect. And I was so ready to get annoyed at them for making it too easy. I was 100% certain I knew who it was, and I was so overjoyed with how things turned out. And again, I will discuss those in a moment with a spoiler warning. Scream 6 was released this year in 2023. I pray that it is not the last one. I hope it isn't, but I also hope we have a bit of time before the next one, if they do another one. This is directed by Tyler Gillett and Matt Bettinelli-Olpin, and we have our usual great cast. And I will say just now there will be spoilers for the previous film, because I'm going to very briefly mention some of the key players in this film, so it will of course spoil who survives in the previous film. But no spoilers for Scream 6 yet. But our cast includes Samara, played by Melissa Barrera, and Jenna Ortega. And we definitely had the Sydney effect with this one. I mentioned in, I think, the previous Scream discussion that it took me a couple of Screams to like Sydney Prescott. And I didn't really care for Sam or Tara in the previous film, but I did now. So we definitely have the Sydney effect there. We also have Gale, who is absolutely wonderful, and a couple of other characters who I'll mention in a moment. And the narrative is quite simple. Somebody is going around as Ghostface again and absolutely slaughtering people. Who is it? And are Sam and Tara targeted? Well, we learn quite quickly that obviously they are. And I think from now, I'm going to have to give a spoiler warning, because I think everything else I'm discussing will be spoilers, and I will also discuss who the killer was. So absolute giant spoiler warning. I'm about to obliterate all of Scream 6. So if you haven't seen it, I'm going to obliterate it with love. I'm going to pull it apart and tear it up, but with love, because I adored it. This is set in New York, which is New York City, which is a little bit different from having it set in Woodsboro. I wasn't really sure how this would work compared to previous ones, but actually it worked very well. It definitely meant that it made a lot of sense for Gale to be in it, so, credit where it's due. I think that was a pretty decent decision. The fact that the killer was revealed within the first, 10 minutes, I was so confused by. But then it made a lot of sense, and I thought that was a really powerful introduction and a really powerful start. The scene, I'm kind of going chronologically at the moment with just things I've written down, but the scene in the store where Sam and Tara are being chased by Ghostface was pretty different, because most of the killings or attempted killings happen in very private locations, usually in a large house or in a secluded part of a building that people aren't in. So to have that in a very public place kind of gave the impression that this was going to be a very different Scream, and it absolutely is. We did get a brief look at Dewey, and that was difficult. I still miss the character a lot, and I wasn't sure what this would be like without him, but it still worked very well. I will say, and again this is chronological, so this may not be the most important thing I have to mention, but at some point, I don't know, maybe halfway through, this stereotypical film fan who's picking apart horror films, who I have to say, I actually grew to love as a character. I really grew to love Mindy, but to begin with, she really bugged me. And she started listing all of these beloved film characters who died. And I won't name any of the ones she mentioned, because I don't want to do that. But she was like, this person and this person and this person from these big horror film series or franchises all ultimately died. That's really, really bad practice, because you don't know that the person watching Scream 6 has seen those films. They might be in the middle of their film journey. For example, had I been watching another horror film and they're like, oh, well, in Scream 6, even this person died, or let's say, for example, in Scream 5, even Dewey died, but I hadn't reached that point in Scream, that would have been horrible. So that was very poor writing on the writer's part. But the only thing in this that was badly written. But that's very bad practice, and film writers should know better than that. And I got really annoyed. However, the rest of the film is glorious. The fact that we have this shrine with all of the killers' masks, and the killers wearing, you know, the different masks from the previous films, I thought was such a lovely touch. And to see all of the killers and the, you know, things belonging to the killers and victims, I just thought was so glorious. And it kind of made it feel like Scream 6 was the final. Because really, where do you go from there? So I hope there's another Scream, but if not, I would be very satisfied with this being the end. The scene from the subway, terrifying, absolutely scary, really, really detested it, loved it, but hated it. And we also have the scene with Gale, of course, the most important scene with Gale. And what I will say is I wish that wasn't the last time we saw Gale, because while we got word that Gale was going to be okay, that wasn't enough for me as a viewer. That didn't satisfy my need for Gale to live. I needed to see her. I needed evidence that she was going to live. So I feel like they should have found a way to give us just a glimpse, just a tiny glimpse of Gale. I don't know, Gale lying in a hospital bed, looking at a photo of Dewey she keeps in her purse. I don't know. There are ways that it could have been done and would have been really emotional, and it would have also been a nice way to get Dewey in there as well again. Yeah, I think that would have been the best way to do it, and I wish they did that. But it does mean that she'll be in the next film, hopefully, if they do another one. I will say the absence of Sydney really irked me to begin with, but I quickly got over that, and it completely worked without her. But at the same time, kind of missed the character. Okay, so I guess the final few minutes, well, actually, probably the last half an hour is when I decided this is my favourite Scream. And I genuinely wasn't expecting to feel that way, to think that, but it really cemented that for me. Now, I, first of all, will tell you who I thought the killer is, or was, and why I thought that, and why I was so sure. And I have to say, massive credit to the writers. Yes, they shouldn't have put in that big list of classic film characters who die, but this was brilliantly written. And I was so ready to get annoyed, because I thought they'd made it too obvious. Because I've never guessed who the killers were. And, you know, over the previous Screams, and I thought, you've done it, it's too obvious this time, it's too obvious. I don't like knowing who it is in advance. I'm so glad I was wrong. But I genuinely believed it was Carvey. And there were 3 reasons for that. And this is in reverse, because the first time when I thought that's who it is when she said, when they're in the shrine, and she said that there's no way the killer can get out of there, I'm the only one with a gun. And then the camera stayed on her for a beat longer than I was comfortable with. And I thought, it's you? And then I started to think back. And I realised that people were telling Sam to not trust anybody. But at no point was she considering that Carvey was untrustworthy. And I thought, okay, it's got to be somebody you're not trusting, or somebody you're not questioning. And then I remembered that Detective Bailey had asked for a background check on Carvey, but nothing ever came of that. We never found out what that background check brought up. So all of the signs were pointing to her. And I was confident. I was 100%. I would have put money on it. I was that certain. So when it was revealed, the bit that kind of shook me first is when she was shot. And the Ghostface standing next to Detective Bailey just lowered their knife. And I thought, what are you doing? And then it all came out, and I just completely in disbelief, absolutely shocked, did not see it coming. So thankful that they made it so obvious, or at least I thought it was obvious who it was, and it was just perfect. Everything about it was gloriously done. And there was one point where I was so glad I was watching this at home and not in a cinema, because I yelled. I don't tend to have a vocal reaction to films when I'm watching them on my own, but there's one point where I yelled and swore really loudly. And it's the bit when Sam just stuck the knife in Detective Bailey's eye, and I've never yelled so much at a film before. It was just such a strong gut reaction. And this is definitely, I believe, the most gory and bloodthirsty. I don't know how many stabs there were. I bet somebody's done that. I bet somebody's counted the number of stabs in Scream films. But this one I feel like had the most. I don't know that for a fact. But it was just so wonderful. So beautiful. Absolutely adored pretty much every second of Scream 6. As I said, this comes off of the back of a pretty weak Scream 5. But I'm glad Scream 5 existed so we could get to Scream 6. Absolutely adored it. Amazing performances, very well filmed, very, very well written, with the exception of, you know, that bit with listing all of the dead film characters, which is annoying me. Because I just imagine if, say, I don't know, Scary Movie franchise said, you know, hey, at the end of Scream, even Dewey dies, all of the classic characters die, and I was only on like Scream 2 or 3. It just would have annoyed me so much. But I have to say, aside from that, I found Scream 6 to be perfect. Aside from, I think they should have had a shot of Gale lying in her hospital bed, looking forlornly at a picture of Dewey that she's been carrying around in her wallet ever since the day he left her. That would have just been heaven. It would have been amazing. I'll just pretend in my head that that happened. But other than that, it's glorious. And I hope there's another one, but part of me hopes there isn't. The same way I feel about Friends Reunion. I hope there is never an actual Friends Reunion because it ended so perfectly. And I don't want them to risk ruining it. Either way, whatever happens, Scream 6 is as close to perfect as it can get, and nothing will ever take that away.